Hello everyone, and welcome back to True Horror. Here on this channel, I share real-life encounters shared by real people to help you unwind and relax. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. The boat started idling just after we put the fire out. It was a low, steady engine noise out on the lake, not loud enough to be obvious, but constant enough that once you noticed it, you couldn't unhear it. I was camping with my girlfriend Tessa and our friend Brian at a popular lake campground in mid-July. It was a Friday night, hot during the day, but cooling off fast once the sun went down. The campground itself was pretty full earlier, families with kids, people grilling, boats out on the water all afternoon. By 10:30 p.m. though, most of it had quieted down. You could hear distant murmurs from a couple RV sites, but our section near the water was mostly dark. Our tent was set up maybe 20 feet from the rocky shoreline. We'd picked it because it had a clear view of the lake during the day. At night, that meant anyone on the water had a clear view of us too. When we first heard the engine, we didn't think much of it. Someone out fishing late, Brian said. It wasn't unusual. People fish at night all the time. But the boat wasn't moving the way fishing boats usually do. It would idle closer, the sound growing louder, then drift back out again. Like whoever was steering was testing the distance. I stood up and walked to the edge of the shoreline. The moonlight was bright enough to see a dark shape about 50 yards offshore. Small boat, maybe aluminum, one person visible at the helm. No lights on except the faint glow of a dashboard. He wasn't casting a line. Not that I could see. He just sat there. The engine cut out briefly, the boat drifted, then the engine kicked back on and it angled slightly closer. I felt this tightness in my chest. "Can he see us?" Tessa asked quietly from behind me. "Yeah," I said. We were the only tent directly on the water in our section. The other lakeside sites were either empty or had campers who'd already turned in. The boat drifted maybe 30 yards away this time, close enough that I could hear the faint slosh of water against the hull. Then it pulled back again. The engine noise faded. "Maybe he's looking for a good spot to anchor," Brian said. "Right in front of us?" I replied. We stood there for a few minutes watching. The boat stayed at a distance now, maybe 60 yards out. Engine idling, then off, then idling again. It felt less like fishing and more like hovering. Around 11 p.m., we decided to head into the tent. We zipped it up, turned off our lantern, and lay down. The engine was still faintly audible. It cut out again. Silence. Then, after a few seconds, it started up once more. Closer this time. Tessa whispered, "Is he still there?" "Yeah," I said. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The boat was about 40 yards away now, pointed directly toward our shoreline. The person inside was just sitting, facing us, not casting, not moving around, just there. I zipped the tent shut again. "Should we say something?" Brian asked. "Like what?" I said. We stayed quiet for a while. The boat engine eventually cut off again. This time it didn't start back up right away. Instead, I heard something else, a faint scrape. Rocks shifting, close. I sat up immediately. "That's not the boat," I whispered. The shoreline near our tent was all loose stones and gravel. You couldn't step on it without making noise. The scrape came again, then a footstep. On the rocks, right outside. Tessa grabbed my arm. "Someone's there," she whispered. I reached for my flashlight and flicked it on. I unzipped the tent fast and swung the beam toward the shoreline. Empty, just rocks and the dark water beyond. But the water was disturbed, small ripples moving outward, and farther out, maybe 30 yards away, the boat's engine roared to life. It pulled away quickly this time. Not idling, actually moving. I stepped fully out of the tent and shined the light across the shoreline. There were fresh scuff marks in the rocks, clear impressions where someone had stepped, wet footprints, barefoot, leading from the water's edge up about 5 feet onto shore, stopping near our cooler, then turning back. I felt cold despite the warm air. "Are those prints?" Brian asked from behind me. "Yeah." The footprints were still damp, glistening slightly in the flashlight beam. Whoever it was had stepped out of the boat onto our shoreline, walked up toward our campsite, and then back into the water, all while we were inside the tent. We hadn't heard the boat get that close. It must have drifted in with the engine off. I shined the light out toward the lake again. The boat was already 50 yards away and gaining distance. No lights on, just a dark shape moving toward the opposite side of the lake. I shouted, "Hey!" The engine didn't slow. It kept going until it was just a faint shape against the water. We stood there for a long time. No one else in the campground came out, no doors opened, either no one else had noticed or we were the only ones targeted. We didn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., the lake was completely quiet again. At first light, I examined the shoreline more closely. The footprints were clear in the damp gravel, adult size. Not huge, but definitely not a kid's. They came straight out of the water, stopped near our site, then went straight back. No wandering, no exploring other areas, just ours. We walked along the shoreline in both directions, no other fresh prints. That made it worse. If someone had been casually swimming or docking elsewhere, there would have been more marks. These were deliberate. Back at the campground office near the entrance, we found a ranger doing morning rounds. I explained what happened. He frowned and asked if we'd gotten a good look at the boat. "Small aluminum, I think," I said. "No lights." He nodded slowly. "People aren't supposed to beach boats in the campground area after dark," he said. "That wasn't just beaching," I replied. He walked up to our tent. The ranger wrote down our information. He said they've had occasional issues with boaters getting too close to campsites at night, especially when alcohol's involved. But stepping onto shore like that, he added quietly, that's not normal. We packed up and left that morning. On the drive home, Tessa kept replaying the sound of rocks shifting. I kept thinking about how the boat drifted closer and farther for almost an hour before that happened. Like whoever it was testing the distance. Seeing how close they could get before we reacted. The part that sticks with me most is how calm it felt at first. Just a boat on the lake, engine idling, nothing dramatic. Until someone stepped out of the water and walked 5 feet from our tent while we were inside, assuming the sound of the engine meant distance. Now, when I camp near water, I don't just watch the tree line, I watch the shoreline too. I posted the photo around 6:45 p.m. It was just a quick picture of the overlook from my campsite. A wide shot of the valley below, sunset hitting the hills just right. I added a simple caption, "Finally made it out here." Didn't tag the exact location, but anyone familiar with the area could probably recognize it. My name's Cameron Holt. I was 29 at the time. I'd driven about 2 hours out to a state forest campground that sits near a cliffside trail. It wasn't remote exactly, but it wasn't crowded either. Late September. Warm afternoon, chilly evening. I'd picked a site that backed up against trees with a clear view toward the valley. When I posted the photo, I didn't think twice about it. I had maybe 600 followers, friends, coworkers, random acquaintances, nothing major. I made dinner, watched the light fade, and zipped up my tent around 9 p.m. About 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. I assumed it was a like or a comment. It was a direct message from someone I didn't recognize. No profile photo, private account. Username was a random mix of letters and numbers. The message read, "I think I just walked past your tent." I stared at it. At first, I actually laughed. It felt like a weird coincidence or someone messing around. I replied, "Haha, good one." 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then another message, "Blue tent, black SUV. You're at the far end near the trees." My stomach dropped. That was accurate. There were maybe 8 campsites in the loop, only 3 occupied. Mine was the farthest from the entrance. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I unzipped the tent slowly and looked out. The campground road was dark but visible in the moonlight. No one walking by. No headlights. I zipped it back up and typed, "Who is this?" The typing bubble appeared. Then, just saying hi. That was it. No emoji, no explanation. I checked the profile, 0 posts, 0 followers, following 1 account. Mine. I hadn't gotten a follow notification earlier. I scrolled through my recent story views. The username wasn't there. That meant they weren't watching my story. They'd seen the post, which meant they were somewhere with cell service. The campground had spotty reception, but I'd had enough to post the photo. I typed, "Where are you?" No response. I waited. Nothing. I tried to tell myself it was someone from another campsite trying to mess with me. But how would they know which tent was mine? Unless they'd been paying attention earlier. Around 10:15 p.m., I heard footsteps on gravel. My heart jumped straight into my throat. Slow steps. Not hurried. Not loud. Coming from the direction of the entrance. I held my breath. The steps moved past the neighboring empty site, then closer. I reached for my flashlight but didn't turn it on. The footsteps slowed near my tent. Stopped. I whispered, "Hello?" No answer, just silence. Then one more step, right outside. I could see a faint shadow through the tent fabric. Tall, still. I grabbed my phone and turned the screen on, angling it toward the wall. The light cast a glow through the nylon. The shadow shifted slightly. Then I heard a low voice. "Nice view, huh?" It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. Just casual. I couldn't tell if it matched the tone of the messages, but my brain connected the two instantly. "Who are you?" I said. The shadow moved back a step, then another. The footsteps resumed. They walked slowly away toward the road. I unzipped the tent quickly and stepped out, shining my flashlight toward the direction the steps had gone. I caught a glimpse of someone walking away between the sites. Dark hoodie, hands in pockets. He didn't run. He didn't look back. Just kept walking until he disappeared into the darkness near the entrance. I stood there shaking. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the same account. "Don't worry. Just walking around." I didn't respond. I locked my car remotely just to hear the confirmation beep. Then I grabbed my keys and got into the driver's seat. I locked the doors. From inside the car, I could see my tent and most of the loop. About 10 minutes later, I saw movement near the entrance. The same figure stood there briefly, looking toward my campsite. Then he turned and walked out of sight. I didn't see a vehicle. No headlights started. No engine, which meant he might have been camping somewhere nearby or parked outside the loop. I stayed in the car the rest of the night. Every little sound made me jump. Around midnight, I heard footsteps again, but this time they didn't come all the way in. They stopped near the entrance, waited, then left. I checked my phone again. No new messages. The account was still there, but it hadn't sent anything else. I considered calling the local sheriff's office, but what would I say? Someone sent me a creepy message and walked past my tent. By 3 a.m., I was exhausted but too wired to sleep. At dawn, I stepped out of the car. The campground looked normal. The other two occupied sites had families who were just starting to wake up. I walked toward the entrance and checked the dirt road. There were fresh footprints in the dust, boot prints, leading from the road into the campground, then back out, only one set. I drove straight to the ranger station about 10 minutes away. I showed them the messages. The ranger took it seriously. He said they've had issues with people monitoring social media posts from the area and then driving out to find the location. I asked if they could track the account. He said they'd report it, but unless the person made direct threats, there wasn't much they could do. On the drive home, I deleted the post, blocked the account, made my profile private. Nothing else happened. No more messages. But what gets me is how quickly it escalated. I posted a photo at sunset. By nightfall, someone had identified my location well enough to walk past my tent and describe it, and then stand outside it. Now, I don't post until I'm home, because knowing someone can look at a picture, figure out where you are, and then physically show up without you ever seeing their car, that changes how you think about just sharing a view. She tore out of the tent so fast, it ripped the zipper halfway down. 1 second, she was curled up against my legs, dead asleep, and the next she was up, nails scrambling on the tent floor, forcing her way through the opening before I could even process what was happening. "Luna!" I hissed, scrambling after her. It was just after midnight. I remember because I'd checked my phone a few minutes earlier. 12:14 a.m. We were camping at a dispersed spot off a Forest Service road about an hour outside town. Not an official campground, just a flat clearing I'd used before, surrounded by trees on 3 sides and open dirt road on the 4th. My name's Zachary Cole. I was 30 at the time. Luna is a German Shepherd mix. She's protective but not reactive. She doesn't bark at random noises. If she alerts, it's for a reason. That's why the way she bolted scared me more than if she just growled. She ran straight toward the tree line behind our campsite, barking hard. Not playful. Not curious, sharp, aggressive barks. I grabbed my flashlight and ran after her barefoot. "Luna, stop!" She didn't listen. About 15 yards from the tent, near a fallen log I'd noticed earlier in the day, she stopped abruptly. Her body was stiff, tail straight, teeth bared, and she was barking at someone. There was a man crouched behind the log. He flinched when my flashlight beam hit him. He was maybe mid-30s. Hoodie pulled up, hands visible but raised slightly. "Hey," he said quickly. "Hey, easy." Luna lunged forward a step but didn't bite. Just kept barking. "What are you doing?" I shouted. He blinked at the light, squinting. "Just passing through," he said. My mind tried to make that make sense. Passing through what? There was no trail behind our site. I'd walked the perimeter when I set up. The only access was the dirt road in front. "This isn't a trail," I said. "I know," he replied, still crouched. "I cut through." "From where?" He didn't answer that. He shifted slightly, and Luna barked louder. "Call your dog off," he said, his tone changing just a little. "You shouldn't be back here," I replied. He stood up slowly. He was taller than I expected. Average build. Dark jeans, sneakers, no backpack, no flashlight, no visible gear. Just him. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said. "You're crouched behind a log in the woods at midnight," I shot back. He gave a small shrug. "Didn't think anyone was back here." My tent was clearly visible from the road. My car was parked right there. You couldn't miss it. "You came from the road?" I asked. He hesitated. "Yeah." "That's the opposite direction." Another shrug. Luna's barking hadn't stopped. I stepped closer, keeping the light on his face. "What's your name?" I asked. He paused. "Eric," he said. It felt like he picked it on the spot. "Eric, there's no trail here, so what are you doing?" He looked past me toward my tent. "Just cutting through," he repeated. The way he said it made my skin crawl. He took a step backward, away from Luna. "All right," he said. "I'm going." He turned and walked deeper into the trees, not toward the road, not toward any visible path, just into the dark. "Hey," I called after him. "Which way are you going?" He didn't respond. Within seconds, he was swallowed by the trees. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding, trying to decide if I should follow. I didn't. There was no way I was chasing someone into pitch black woods. I called Luna back and she came immediately, still growling low. We went back to the tent. My hands were shaking as I zipped it shut. I sat there listening. For maybe 5 minutes, I heard nothing. Then, faintly, branches snapping. Not far. Moving parallel to the campsite. He hadn't gone straight away. He was circling. I grabbed my car keys and hit the lock button just to hear the beep. The noise echoed through the clearing. The branch snapping stopped. Silence. Luna sat upright, ears forward. 10 minutes passed, then I heard something else. A soft crunch on gravel from the roadside. I unzipped the tent again and stepped out. The dirt road was empty. No headlights, no vehicles, but there were fresh footprints in the dust near my car. Boot prints, leading from the road into the trees and back. He had come from the road after all, and he'd stepped into the trees behind my campsite without walking through the clearing first, which meant he'd deliberately avoided being seen. I got into the car, locked the doors, left the tent standing. I didn't bother packing anything yet. Around 1:30 a.m., I saw movement near the edge of the road, a shadow moving along the tree line. Too far to see clearly. "But there," Luna growled again. I turned the engine on and flashed the headlights toward that side. The shadow disappeared instantly. That was enough for me. I started packing up in the dark, sleeping bag shoved into the trunk, tent poles yanked out fast. I didn't care about neatness. I wanted out. By 2:15 a.m., I was driving back toward the highway. About half a mile down the road, I saw something that made my stomach flip. A car parked partially hidden behind a bend, lights off. Dark sedan. No other vehicles anywhere nearby. I didn't slow down, I just kept driving. The next morning, I called the ranger district office and reported what happened. The ranger asked if the man had threatened me. "No," I said. "Did he try to enter your tent?" "No." He sighed. "We'll note it," he said. "But unless he committed a crime, there's not much we can do." I get that. Technically, he was just passing through. But he wasn't hiking. He wasn't carrying gear. He wasn't following a trail. He was crouched behind a log in the woods 15 yards from my tent at midnight. And he didn't look surprised to be caught. If Luna hadn't bolted, I don't know how long he would have stayed there, or how close he would have come. Now, when I camp, I don't just check for animal tracks, I check for footprints, because I know how quiet someone can be if they want to watch without being seen. He walked into my campsite just as the sun was dropping behind the trees and asked if he could share my fire. I'd just gotten it going. Small flame, nothing dramatic. It was early November, colder than I'd expected, and I was camping alone at a quiet state forest campground that stays open year-round but doesn't see much traffic after October. My name's Logan Pierce. I was 33 at the time. I'd picked a site at the far end of the loop mostly because I liked the space. There were only 2 other vehicles in the entire campground when I arrived around 4 p.m., both parked near the entrance. I hadn't seen anyone walking around. So when this guy stepped out from the tree line behind my site instead of coming down the road, it caught me off guard. "Hey," he said, hands in his jacket pockets. "Mind if I warm up for a bit?" He was maybe mid-40s, short hair, scruffy beard, jeans, and a dark hoodie. No backpack, no lantern, no cooler. Nothing in his hands. "Forgot my matches," he added, nodding toward my fire. "Can't get mine going." "You camping here?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quickly. "Over that way." He jerked his thumb vaguely behind him. That direction wasn't where any official sites were. I hesitated, then said, "Sure, for a minute." He stepped closer and crouched by the fire. Held his hands out like he was cold. The thing that struck me immediately was that he didn't smell like campfire smoke. If he'd tried and failed to start a fire, he'd at least smell like lighter fluid or something. Instead, he just smelled like sweat and dirt. "Been out here long?" he asked. "Just gotten a few hours ago," I said. "You alone?" "Yeah." He nodded slowly. "No one else coming?" he asked. "Not that I know of." He stared into the fire for a few seconds. Then his eyes shifted. Toward my tent. I had my car keys hanging from a small hook inside the tent door, just so I wouldn't lose them. The zipper was half open, and from where he was crouched, you could see them dangling. His gaze lingered there a little too long. "You heading out tomorrow?" he asked. "Yeah, early." "What time?" "Not sure." He smiled slightly. "Just curious." The conversation felt less like small talk and more like he was collecting information. "Where's your site?" I asked. He shrugged. "Back there." Didn't want to be too close to the road. "There aren't sites back there," I said without thinking. He paused. "Dispersed?" he said finally. "I like the quiet." That made no sense. This was a designated campground. Dispersed camping wasn't allowed inside it. He kept glancing at the tent, then at my car. "Nice vehicle," he said. "You got remote start on that?" "Yeah," I said. "Good for cold mornings." He stood up and walked casually toward the tent. "Bathrooms that way?" he asked, even though the bathrooms were clearly marked and in the opposite direction. "Other side of the loop," I said. He nodded and stopped near the tent opening, close enough to see the keys clearly. "You mind if I grab a coal from your fire?" he asked. "I can bring one to you," I said quickly. He held my gaze for a second, then smiled again. "Nah, I'll come back." He walked away the same way he'd come, into the trees. I waited until I couldn't see him anymore before I stood up and grabbed the keys off the hook. My heart was beating faster than I wanted to admit. I doused the fire. Or, not completely, but enough to shrink it down to embers. About 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps again, this time from the road. He walked back into the clearing like nothing was wrong. "Change your mind?" he asked. "I'm turning in early," I said. "Cold night." He looked disappointed. "You sure you don't mind if I grab one coal? Just need something to get mine going." "I'll bring it to you," I repeated. He didn't move closer this time. Just stood there. "You camping alone is brave," he said. I didn't answer. He shifted his weight and looked around the clearing slowly like he was taking inventory. "Not a lot of people out here this time of year," he added. "That's why I like it," I said. He held my eyes again for a few seconds, then he nodded once. "All right, night." He walked back toward the trees again. I didn't wait. I grabbed my sleeping bag, my backpack, and got into the driver's seat of my car. Locked the doors immediately. I left the tent up. Didn't bother packing it. From the car, I could see my campsite clearly. The trees were thin enough that if he came back, I'd know. Around 9:30 p.m., I saw movement near the edge of the tree line. Him. He stood there for a moment, looking at the tent. Then he stepped into the clearing slowly. He walked right up to the tent entrance. I held my breath. He paused, looked around, then reached toward where the keys had been hanging earlier. My stomach flipped. He must have realized they were gone. He stood there for maybe 10 seconds. Then he walked around the tent once, just circling, like he was checking if anyone was inside. Then he stopped near the fire pit and looked toward my car. I ducked lower in the seat, even though the windows were tinted. After another minute, he walked back into the trees. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then I heard a car door slam somewhere beyond the tree line. An engine started. Headlights flashed briefly through the trees, and a vehicle drove off down the dirt road. I stayed in the car until morning. Didn't sleep. Just watched the tree line. At first light, I stepped out. The dirt near my tent showed clear footprints, boot prints. They'd come from the direction of the woods, not the road. There were multiple sets around the tent, and one set near the fire pit where he'd stood, looking at the car. I packed up fast and left. On my way out of the campground, I passed a dark sedan parked about half a mile down the road, partially hidden behind brush. No tent, no gear, just the car, empty. Maybe it was his, maybe not. I didn't stop to find out. When I think back on it, it wasn't anything dramatic. He didn't threaten me, didn't break in, but he didn't have matches. He didn't have gear. He didn't have a clear explanation for where he was staying, and he kept looking at my keys like they were the most interesting thing in the entire clearing. If I'd left them hanging where they were and zipped into the tent like usual, I don't know what he would have done. Now, when I camp alone, the keys stay in my pocket. And if someone forgets matches without carrying anything else, I don't offer them a seat by the fire. The tent shifted just enough to wake me up. Not a big movement, just a soft bump near my feet, like someone had nudged it with their shoe. At first I thought it was wind. It had been breezy when I went to bed. I lay there for a few seconds, eyes closed, waiting for another gust. Instead, I heard breathing, slow, close. Close enough that it wasn't blending in with the trees. My name's Aaron Mitchell. I was camping alone at a small lakeside campground in early October. It was one of those county-run places that stays open year-round, but doesn't have staff on site after dark. There were maybe 4 other campsites occupied when I arrived that afternoon, all scattered pretty far apart. By the time I'd gone to bed around 10:30 p.m., everything had gone quiet. The air was cold but still. No rain, no real wind. The breathing came again. A soft inhale, then an exhale that fogged the inside of the tent fabric for a second. I froze. It was coming from right outside the tent wall near my feet. The nylon moved slightly again, not enough to collapse it, just a subtle pressure, like someone shifting their weight. I told myself it could be a deer. Maybe it had wandered too close. But deer don't breathe like that. Not slow and steady, like someone standing still. And deer don't nudge tents twice and then stop. I opened my eyes fully and stared at the dark ceiling above me. I didn't move. The breathing stayed steady. Then the tent shifted again, this time near the side, closer to my torso. It wasn't wind, it was controlled. I reached slowly toward the small flashlight I keep in the side pocket of the tent. My fingers felt clumsy. The breathing paused, like whoever was out there had heard the faint rustle inside. Then I heard something else, a small scrape against the gravel, a shoe. I clicked the flashlight on and swung it toward the tent wall. The beam lit up the nylon, and I saw it. A clear outline of a person standing right outside, tall, shoulders squared, head slightly tilted. The light hit the fabric and their shadow sharpened. They didn't jump back. They didn't run. They just stood there. For maybe 3 full seconds, we stayed like that. Then the shadow shifted, slowly. They turned and stepped away. I scrambled upright and unzipped the tent fast. Cold air hit my face. About 10 feet away, I saw a man walking back toward the tree line. Dark jacket, jeans, medium build. He didn't look back. "Hey!" I shouted. He kept walking, not sprinting, not stumbling, just calm. I stepped out fully, shining the flashlight after him. "Hey! What are you doing?" He paused at the edge of the trees, turned his head slightly, but not enough for me to see his face clearly. "Wrong tent," he said. Then he stepped into the trees and disappeared. "Wrong tent." That's what he said. I stood there shaking, trying to process that. There were only 4 occupied sites in the entire campground, and the nearest one was at least 50 yards away. No one accidentally ends up pressed against someone else's tent in the middle of the night. I walked a slow circle around my campsite. The ground was a mix of dirt and small stones. Near the side where he'd been standing, I saw fresh footprints, boot prints, deep enough to leave a clear tread pattern. They led from the direction of the bathrooms, not from any campsite. He hadn't come from another tent. He'd come from the dark. I looked toward the bathroom building, maybe 100 yards away. All the lights were off. I didn't sleep again that night. I stayed in the car with the doors locked until morning. Around 6 a.m., I walked over to the campground entrance where there's a small bulletin board with emergency contact numbers. There's no ranger station there overnight. I called the county non-emergency line and reported what happened. The dispatcher asked if he tried to enter the tent. No, I said, just stood there. She asked if I recognized him from any of the other campsites. I hadn't gotten a clear look at his face. She said they'd send a patrol car through later that morning. By 8 a.m., I saw a sheriff's SUV drive slowly through the loop. I flagged him down and explained everything. He walked back to my site and looked at the footprints. Looks like he was standing here a while, the deputy said. The prints were clustered, not just one or two steps, like he'd been deciding something. The deputy asked if I'd left any lights on or made noise that would have drawn attention. No, I said. He nodded. We get people drifting through here sometimes, he said. Transients, people sleeping in their cars. Sometimes they wander. Wander into tents? I asked. He didn't answer that directly. He just said, you did the right thing, turning on the light and making noise. I packed up right after that. As I loaded my car, I kept glancing toward the tree line where he disappeared. I kept replaying the moment when the flashlight beam hit the tent. The outline of him, the fact that he didn't flinch, and the way he walked away. Not hurried, not embarrassed, just slow and steady, like he wasn't surprised to be caught. Wrong tent doesn't make sense. If you're looking for someone, you call out their name. You don't press up against random tents and breathe into the fabric. What sticks with me most is how quiet it was before the nudges. He didn't trip over guy lines, he didn't step on gear. He walked right up to the side of my tent without making enough noise to wake me until he physically touched it. Now when I camp alone, I don't sleep as deeply. Every little movement outside the tent gets my attention, because I know how easy it is for someone to stand inches from you in the dark, close enough that you can hear their breathing, and you won't even know until the fabric shifts. The truck rolled in without headlights and stopped at the entrance to the campground. It was 11:02 p.m., I remember, because I had just checked my phone to see how cold it was getting. We were camping in late October, technically after the campground had closed for the season. The gate was open, but there were no staff, no reservations, no other campers. Just us. My name's Trevor Lang. I was there with 3 friends, Mason, Drew, and Kyle. We'd done off-season trips before. You get the whole place to yourself, and as long as you're not trashing anything, no one really bothers you. The campground sat in a shallow bowl surrounded by trees. The entrance road sloped down from the main highway, and from our campsite near the middle loop, we could see the entrance if we leaned a little to the side. We'd had a small fire going since dusk. Nothing huge, just enough to keep warm. When the truck appeared, we didn't hear it at first. We noticed it because the darkness at the entrance changed. 1 second it was empty road. The next second there was a darker shape blocking the faint starlight. No headlights? Mason said quietly. The truck had come down the road completely dark. It stopped just inside the entrance, angled slightly toward the loop. Engine idling. No interior lights. No doors opening. We all turned to look. From where we sat, maybe 60 yards away, we could see the outline of 2 people in the cab. Driver and passenger. They didn't get out. They didn't move. They just sat there. Maybe they're turning around, Drew said. We waited. 30 seconds passed. A minute. The engine kept running. They can see us, Kyle said. We're the only light out here. He was right. Our fire was the only visible thing in the entire campground. I stood up casually and stretched, pretending not to stare. The truck stayed put. After about 2 minutes, Mason called out, "You guys good?" His voice carried across the quiet. No response, no wave, nothing. The silhouettes didn't shift. It felt like they were watching the fire, watching us. "Maybe it's rangers," Drew said. "Rangers use headlights," I said. We kept our voices low after that. The truck's engine finally shut off. That made it worse. Now, they weren't even pretending they might leave. They were parked there, in the dark. I tried to see details. It looked like an older pickup, maybe dark green or black. Hard to tell. After another minute, the interior dome light flicked on briefly, like someone had opened a door halfway and then closed it again. But no one got out. The light went off. They stayed. Mason leaned toward me. "Why park there? There's open sights." He was right. If they wanted to camp, they'd drive in and pick a spot. The whole place was empty. Instead, they chose the entrance. A vantage point. Kyle stood up. I'm grabbing the truck keys. He walked to his SUV and quietly unlocked it. The truck at the entrance didn't react. No lights, no movement. I tried something. I picked up a piece of wood and tossed it onto the fire. The flames flared up brighter. The truck stayed still. It felt like a test, like they were waiting to see what we'd do. After about 10 minutes of this, Mason said, "Let's just kill the fire." "What?" Drew said. "They're not leaving," Mason replied. "Why are we the only ones lit up?" He had a point. If they were watching, we were basically spotlighting ourselves. We poured water on the fire slowly. The flames died down to embers. As the clearing darkened, the truck became harder to see, but I could still make out the outline of the cab against the sky. They didn't start the engine. They didn't drive away. They just stayed. We moved our chairs closer together and kept talking quietly, like normal. Every few minutes, I glanced toward the entrance. Still there. At one point, around 11:20, I thought I saw the driver's silhouette lean forward slightly, not getting out, just adjusting. Kyle whispered, "This is weird." "Maybe they're drunk and lost," Drew suggested. "Then why not turn around?" Mason said. Good question. Around 11:30, the passenger door opened a crack. Interior light flicked on again. A figure shifted, then the door closed. They didn't step out, they just adjusted something and shut it again. That's when my stomach really started to knot. They weren't confused. They weren't trying to decide where to park. They were choosing to sit there, watching. The campground had no cell service. We'd known that coming in. Calling anyone wasn't an option. Around 11:45, Mason said quietly, "Let's go to our tents." We started packing up the chairs. I made a show of yawning like we were just tired. We turned off our lantern. Now the entire campground was dark except for the faint outline of that truck. I zipped into my tent but left a small gap near the top so I could see out. The truck was still there. No headlights, no movement. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then I heard it. A soft car door closing. I froze. I couldn't see clearly from inside the tent, but I heard gravel crunch. Not near us, near the entrance. Footsteps. Then another door closing. Engine turned over. The truck idled again. It didn't drive into the campground. It backed up slowly toward the road. Then it stopped for a second, like it was waiting. Then it pulled out onto the main highway and drove off. We all stayed in our tents for another 20 minutes. No one spoke. Eventually Mason whispered, "They gone?" "Yeah," I said. None of us slept well. In the morning, we walked up to the entrance to look around. Fresh tire tracks were visible in the soft dirt. They had pulled in just enough to see the whole loop. There were no other tracks, no signs they'd driven deeper in. Just in. Park, sit, leave. Kyle crouched and pointed. They were angled toward us? He was right. The front of the truck had been pointed directly at our campsite. That meant they had a clear line of sight to our fire the entire time. We didn't find footprints leading into the campground. No sign they'd walked around. They didn't need to. They could see everything from where they were. We packed up that morning instead of staying the second night. On the drive out, I kept replaying it. Maybe they were just curious. Maybe they saw the fire and wanted to see who was out there. But they killed their headlights before turning in. They shut off the engine and sat in the dark. And they didn't move until we put our lights out. That's the part I can't ignore. It felt like they were waiting for us to go to sleep, waiting for the campground to go fully dark. Maybe nothing would have happened. Maybe they would have driven off either way. But sitting there in silence, knowing two people were just watching from the entrance of an empty, closed campground, changed the whole feeling of that place. Off-season used to mean quiet. Now it just means no one else is around to notice if a truck pulls in without headlights and waits. The ribbon was tied in a tight little knot around a low branch about 6 feet from my tent. Bright red, maybe 4 inches long, thin like something cut off a gift wrap spool. It wasn't there when I set up. I know that for a fact. My name's Nolan Pierce. I was camping alone along a stretch of river about 2 hours outside the city, not an official campground, just a spot I'd used before, where a dirt road ends near a bend in the water. Early July, hot during the day, cooler at night. No rain in the forecast. I'd gotten there around 3 p.m. I'm picky when I camp alone. I walk the site first, check for trash, Look for signs someone's been around recently. The branch where the ribbon was tied had been bare. I even leaned my camp chair against it while setting up. Around 6 p.m., I walked down to the river with a folding chair and a beer. Sat there for maybe 40 minutes, just watching the current. When I came back up toward my tent, that's when I saw it. The ribbon caught my eye immediately because of the color. Red against all the green and brown. I stopped mid-step. It was tied neatly, not tangled in from wind, not snagged randomly. Someone had looped it and cinched it tight. I walked closer and touched it. Clean, not weathered. I scanned the area. My car was still where I left it. The gravel drive-in had no fresh tire tracks beyond mine. No other campers nearby. I could see at least 50 yards in every direction. I untied the ribbon slowly. As I pulled it free, I felt stupid. Maybe it had been there and I missed it. Maybe it was some kind of old trail marker. But I knew it hadn't been there. I kept it in my pocket. The rest of the evening felt different. Every sound carried more weight. Around 9 p.m., I heard a car somewhere up the dirt road. Not coming all the way down to my site, just passing on the main path. It slowed briefly, then kept going. By 10:30, I zipped into my tent. The river was close enough that I could hear it constantly, a steady, low rush over rocks. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. At first, I thought it was just the heat, but then I heard something that didn't match the river's sound. A splash, not a fish, not random, a footstep, in water, slow, deliberate. I held my breath and listened. Another step, water shifting around something solid, then another. It sounded like someone wading in the shallow part of the river, back and forth, step, pause. The pattern repeated. I checked my phone, 1:17 a.m. The footsteps didn't move closer to shore. They stayed in the water, like someone pacing in a straight line across a shallow section. I whispered, "Hello?" The pacing stopped immediately. Silence, except for the normal current. Then, after maybe 10 seconds, one slow step. Closer to my side of the bank. I felt my chest tighten. The riverbank was about 20 feet from my tent. If someone stepped out of the water and walked up, they'd be at my site in seconds. I grabbed my headlamp but didn't turn it on. Another step. Then nothing. Just the sound of water settling. I sat there for a long time. Eventually, I heard movement again, but this time it was farther downriver, not pacing anymore, just someone wading away. I waited another 15 minutes before unzipping the tent. The night was clear. Half moon, enough light to see shapes. The river looked calm again, no visible figure. I walked to the edge of my site and shined the headlamp across the water. Nothing. No one standing on the opposite bank. I scanned the shoreline near me. The dirt looked dark, but I couldn't tell much in that light. I went back into the tent, but didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard faint movement in the brush near the riverbank, but it could have been animals. I stayed awake until the sky started to lighten. At first light, I walked straight to the fire pit. That's when I saw them, wet footprints. Clear, defined prints in the dirt leading from the riverbank up toward my site. Bare feet, not boot prints, not shoes, bare. The prints stopped about 2 feet from my fire pit. Right where I'd been sitting the night before, I crouched down. The toes were clearly defined, the heel, the arch. The dirt was still slightly damp from the river. They'd walked up sometime after waiting, and they'd stood there, facing my tent. I followed the prints back toward the river. They went straight into the water. No other prints leading away on land. That meant whoever it was had stepped out, walked up, stood near my fire pit, and then walked straight back into the river. I scanned the opposite bank. There was a narrow path there that led into thicker woods. I hadn't noticed it the day before. It wasn't an official trail, just a faint line where grass was pressed down. I went back to the branch where the ribbon had been tied. The bark still had a faint indentation where it had been cinched. That detail made it feel intentional, like someone had marked my spot, maybe to find it again in the dark, maybe to see if I noticed. I packed up immediately. As I loaded my car, I kept glancing toward the opposite bank. Nothing moved. On the drive out, about half a mile up the dirt road, I saw a dark pickup parked partially hidden behind trees, no one visible inside. I slowed instinctively. As I passed, I saw the driver's side window was cracked slightly. I didn't stop. I drove straight to the ranger station near the highway. The ranger listened carefully. When I mentioned the ribbon and the footprints, he frowned. He said there have been reports of people camping unofficially along that river stretch. Sometimes they fish at night. Sometimes they check out other campsites. Check out how? I asked. He hesitated. Just seeing who's there. That phrase made my skin crawl. He said sometimes people mark spots with ribbon during the day so they can find them again in the dark. He didn't say more than that. I drove home feeling watched the whole way. Maybe it was someone fishing barefoot in the river. Maybe they wandered too close without thinking. But the pacing back and forth in the water didn't sound casual. It sounded like waiting. And the footprints stopping right at my fire pit, not wandering around, not exploring, just stopping there, like they were seeing how close I could get. Now, when I camp near water, I don't just think about the current. I think about someone standing knee-deep in the dark, listening to you breathe through a thin layer of tent fabric, deciding whether to step onto the bank. The flashlight hit the tent so hard it lit the whole thing up white. I was half asleep when it happened. 1 second, everything was dark, just the sound of crickets and the lake in the distance. And the next second, the entire inside of the tent was glowing like someone had turned on a spotlight. "Eli," my cousin whispered, sharp and panicked. "Did you see that?" I was already sitting up. "My name's Eli Martinez." I was 27 at the time. My younger cousin Mateo was 17. It was his first time camping without his parents, and I'd told my aunt I'd keep things easy. We picked a small state park about an hour from home. Nothing remote, just a basic campground near a lake with maybe 15 sites. It was early June, warm day, cool night, no rain. We'd set up around 5 p.m. Most of the campground was empty. There were 2 RVs near the entrance and one other tent site across the loop from us. That was it. By midnight, everything was quiet. Then the light hit. It wasn't a random sweep like someone walking by. It was steady, centered, like someone standing directly in front of the tent and aiming straight at it. "Hello," I called out. The light snapped off, dark again. Mateo grabbed my arm. "Someone's out there." I held up a finger for him to stay quiet. Then I heard it. Whispering. Not loud, not laughing, low, tense whispering. 2 voices. I couldn't make out words, just the rhythm of it. One voice sounded irritated. The other sounded nervous. They weren't moving away. They were right outside. My stomach tightened. I reached slowly for my phone and turned the screen on just to check the time. 12:18 a.m. The whispering continued. Mateo leaned close to my ear. "What do we do?" I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "We're fine." Then the flashlight clicked back on. This time it moved slightly, like whoever was holding it shifted their wrist. The beam slid along the fabric, up near where our heads were. I could see the outline of a hand through the tent wall. They were close enough that the beam wasn't diffused much. I felt anger push past the fear. "Hey!" I shouted. "What are you doing?" The light shut off instantly. The whispering got faster. One of the voices hissed something sharp, like, "Go." I didn't wait. "We're calling the police," I yelled as loud as I could. There was a sudden crunch of leaves, then footsteps. But they didn't run toward the road. They ran into the woods behind our site. That's what made my chest go cold. The campground road was in front of us. Bathrooms and other campers were that way. Instead of running toward open space, they went deeper into the tree line. I scrambled out of the tent with my phone light on. "Stay inside," I told Mateo. I stepped out and swung the beam toward the woods. I caught a glimpse of 2 figures about 20 feet back, both wearing dark hoodies, one taller than the other. They didn't look back. They moved quickly between trees and disappeared. I stood there, heart hammering, listening, branches snapping, then nothing. I walked toward the edge of our site, but didn't step fully into the woods. The ground was mostly dirt and scattered leaves. I could see fresh scuffs where someone had run. "Eli?" Mateo called from inside the tent. "I'm here," I said. I walked back and grabbed the car keys from our cooler bag. I hit the panic button. The car alarm blared through the campground. Lights flashed. If anyone else was around, they'd see it. No one came out of the RVs, no doors opened. The other tent across the loop stayed dark. After a minute, I shut the alarm off. We didn't sleep after that. We sat in the car with the doors locked, engine off, just listening. Around 1 a.m., I thought I heard movement again in the woods, a branch breaking, but it didn't come closer. By 2 a.m., everything was silent. At first light, I walked the perimeter of our site. Behind the tent, about 10 feet into the trees, there were clear footprints, 2 different sizes, boot prints. They'd stood directly behind where our heads had been. There were no signs of a camp deeper in that direction. No tents, no cars parked illegally nearby. I followed the prints about 30 yards into the woods. They led toward a narrow path that cut through to another part of the campground. Not the main road, a back way. When I came back, Mateo was already packing up his sleeping bag. "We're leaving, right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. As we loaded the car, I noticed something else. On the ground near our fire pit, there was a cigarette butt. Neither of us smoked. It hadn't been there the night before. I was sure of that. They'd been close enough to stand in our sight before shining the light. I walked over to the campground host's cabin near the entrance. It was empty. A sign on the door said the host was out until 9 a.m. We didn't wait. On the drive out, I passed the other tent across the loop. It looked normal. No sign that anyone there had noticed anything. About a mile down the main road, I pulled over and called the local sheriff's office. I explained what happened. 2 people, flashlight, whispering, running into the woods. The dispatcher asked if they'd tried to enter the tent. "No," I said, "just shine the light." She said they'd send someone to patrol the campground. I don't know if they ever found anyone. What stuck with me wasn't just the flashlight. It was the whispering. They weren't laughing. They weren't joking around like teenagers playing a prank. They sounded tense, like they were deciding something. And when I yelled about the police, they didn't scatter in different directions. They ran together, into the woods. If they'd been random hikers messing around, they would have run toward the road or their car. Instead, they knew exactly where they were going. Mateo didn't say much on the drive home. Later that week, he asked me why they didn't say anything when I shouted. I didn't have a good answer. Maybe they were checking if the tent was occupied. Maybe they were trying to scare someone. Or maybe they were seeing if 2 people in a small tent would panic and unzip the door without thinking. All I know is they were close enough to light up the fabric inches from our faces. And they stayed long enough to argue quietly before deciding what to do. Now, when I camp with anyone younger than me, I don't just think about bears or weather. I think about 2 silhouettes standing outside a thin layer of nylon, whispering in the dark. He parked less than 30 feet from me, in a clearing that could have fit 10 trucks. I was out on dispersed land off a Forest Service road in eastern Oregon. No marked sites, just a wide open stretch where people could pull off and camp wherever they wanted. It was late August, dry and warm during the day, but cooling off fast after sunset. My name's Ryan Calder. I was 34 at the time. I'd gotten off work early on a Friday and decided to drive out solo for a quiet overnight. I'd been to that general area before. Usually, if you see another camper, they park at least 100 yards away. There's no reason not to. I'd been set up for maybe 40 minutes. Tent pitched, camp chair out, small fire started. Then I heard an engine. A white SUV came slowly down the dirt road and turned into the clearing. I figured he'd pass me and keep going deeper in. He didn't. He pulled in and stopped directly across from my tent, maybe 25 feet away. I watched from my chair, confused. He shut off the engine and sat there for a minute. Then he got out, mid-40s maybe. Shaved head, thin frame, camo cargo pants, black t-shirt. He gave me a nod. "Evening." "Hey," I replied. He looked around the clearing like he was evaluating it. Then he started unloading gear. Right there. Not farther out, not behind the trees, just right across from me. There were at least 3 other obvious flat spots he could have chosen. I told myself maybe he didn't want to drive farther in. Still, it felt intentional. He set up a small tent and unfolded a camping chair. No fire, just sat down facing in my direction. I tried to ignore it and went back to poking at my fire. After about 10 minutes, he stood up and walked over. "You been out here long?" he asked. "Got here about an hour ago," I said. He nodded slowly. "Staying the weekend?" "Just tonight." He smiled slightly. "That's it?" He looked at my car. "You alone?" "Yeah." He paused. "Anyone know you're out here?" he asked. The question landed wrong. "Yeah," I said immediately. "My sister's got my location." That was a lie, but I said it without hesitation. He nodded again, like he was processing that. "What time you heading out tomorrow?" he asked. "Early." "How early?" I shrugged. "Depends." He held eye contact a little too long. "Cool," he said finally. Just curious, don't see many people out here. That wasn't true. This was a popular, dispersed area. He walked back to his site. I sat there staring at the fire, replaying the conversation. It wasn't what he asked, it was how specific he got. Staying how long, leaving when. Anyone know you're here? I tried to shake it off. As the sun went down, the clearing got quiet. No wind. Just that dry, dusty silence you get in open forest land. Around 8 p.m., I heard him moving around again. It was just not gathering wood, not cooking, just pacing. I could see his silhouette walking back and forth between his tent and the edge of the clearing. At one point, he walked toward my car and stopped about 10 feet from it. "You mind if I check something?" he called out. "Check what?" I asked. "Just seeing what kind of tires those are." I blinked at him. "They're just stock tires." He laughed lightly. Yeah, just curious." He didn't actually get close enough to look at them. He just stood there for a second, then turned around. By 10 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I put out the fire, zipped up my tent, and lay down. I left my keys inside the tent within reach. For about an hour, it was quiet. Then I heard footsteps, not on the main dirt road, in the clearing. Slow, measured, back and forth. Crunch, pause, crunch. I sat up in my sleeping bag and listened. The footsteps stopped near my car. I held my breath, then they moved again. Closer to my tent this time. Not right up against it, but close enough that I could hear the dirt shifting under his boots. He wasn't talking, wasn't coughing, just walking, back and forth like he was thinking. After about 5 minutes of that, I whispered, "You good?" The footsteps stopped immediately. Silence. Then his voice, from somewhere in the dark. "Yeah, just stretching my legs." "At midnight?" I asked. He didn't answer that. The footsteps moved away toward his tent. I lay back down, but I didn't close my eyes. 10 minutes later, I heard it again. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. This time slower. He walked from his tent toward mine. Stopped. Walked back. Stopped. I realized he was keeping the same distance each time. Not approaching fully. Just staying near the edge. Testing. I grabbed my phone and quietly turned on the screen. 12:47 a.m. I thought about the questions he'd asked earlier. Who knows you're here? When are you leaving? That wasn't small talk. That was information gathering. I listened for another 5 minutes. Then I heard something that made my decision. A slow exhale. Close. Too close. Like he'd stepped nearer to the tent and was just standing there. Not touching it. Just waiting. I didn't say anything this time. I reached slowly for my keys. The footsteps shifted slightly, like he'd heard movement inside. That was it for me. I hit the panic button. The car alarm exploded into the clearing, lights flashing, horn blaring. I unzipped the tent immediately and stepped out. He was standing about 15 feet away, frozen. "Can I help you?" I shouted over the alarm. He blinked, almost annoyed. "Relax," he said. "I was just seeing if you were awake." "Why?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked back toward his tent. I kept the alarm going for a few more seconds, then shut it off. My hands were shaking. I didn't wait. I threw my sleeping bag into the back seat, yanked tent stakes out as fast as I could, and shoved everything into the car. He stood by his tent watching me pack. Not helping, not approaching, just watching. "You don't have to leave," he said calmly. I wasn't doing anything. I didn't respond. I got in the driver's seat and locked the doors. As I started the engine, he took a step forward. I backed up immediately and turned toward the dirt road. In my rearview mirror, I saw him still standing there, arms at his sides. He didn't wave. He didn't move. I drove out of there at 2:08 a.m., didn't stop until I hit the main highway. Nothing chased me. No headlights appeared behind me. Maybe he really was harmless. Maybe he just had no sense of boundaries, but the way he paced, the way he asked about who knew I was there, and the way he stood near my tent without saying anything. It felt like he was waiting for the moment I stopped reacting. Waiting for the moment I fell asleep for real. Now, when I camp dispersed, if someone parks too close in a wide open space, I don't assume coincidence. I assume I'm being sized up. The tapping was so light I thought I imagined it. Just 3 soft clicks against the rear window. Not a knock, not someone pounding, more like someone testing the glass with their fingernail. I was asleep in the back of my Subaru, parked on a pull-off road near the edge of a national forest. My name's Marcus Ellison. I'd driven out there after work on a Friday because I didn't feel like paying for a campsite. It wasn't an official campground. just one of those gravel turnouts people use for fishing or trail access. I'd stealth camped plenty of times before. It was late September, cool, dry air, no rain. The road I'd parked on was about half a mile off the main highway, surrounded by trees. I'd picked the spot because it felt quiet but not completely isolated. The tapping came again. Tap, tap, soft, careful. I opened my eyes but didn't move. My phone was face down beside me. I turned my head slightly toward it without lifting it. 3:07 a.m. The tapping stopped. For a few seconds, I convinced myself it was a branch brushing the glass. Maybe wind. But there was no wind. I could hear the trees. They were still. Then I heard gravel crunch, right behind the car, slow footsteps. My whole body went rigid. I didn't sit up. I didn't reach for anything. I just stayed there, eyes open in the dark, heart thudding. Another step, closer to the side now. The car shifted slightly, the way it does when someone leans on it. Not enough to rock it hard, just a small, subtle movement. Whoever it was wasn't trying to be loud. That was the part that got me. If it had been someone drunk or aggressive, they would have knocked hard, yelled, tried the door handles. Instead, they were moving carefully, quietly. I heard breathing. Or maybe I imagined it. It sounded like someone standing close, shifting their weight. The footsteps moved toward the passenger's side, then stopped. I heard a faint scrape, like fingers sliding along the window. I stayed completely still. I didn't want them to know I was awake. Another tap, this time on the side window. Not a knock, just the lightest contact. I pictured someone leaning down, trying to see inside. My windows were tinted, but not heavily. After maybe 30 seconds of silence, the footsteps resumed. They moved toward the front of the car, then along the driver's side, then back toward the rear. Slow circle. I counted each step in my head. 1, 2, 3. I didn't know what the plan was. Were they checking if someone was inside? Seeing if the car was unlocked? I'd locked it. I was sure of that. At one point, I heard a faint metallic sound near the driver's door, like someone lightly touching the handle. I forced myself not to react. The car didn't beep. The alarm didn't go off. So either they didn't pull hard enough, or they were just feeling it. The footsteps paused again at the back of the car. Then I heard something else. A faint buzz, a phone vibration. It was close, very close, like someone standing a few feet from my rear bumper. The buzzing stopped quickly, then silence. After about a minute, I heard the footsteps move away. Not running, just walking. Gravel crunching slowly toward the road. I waited. 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. Then I heard an engine start. It wasn't right next to me. It was farther down the road, maybe 50 yards away. Headlights briefly flashed through the trees, casting faint light across the inside of my car. Then the vehicle drove off. I lay there for a long time after that. I didn't move until the sky started to lighten around 6 a.m. When I finally sat up, my back was stiff from holding the same position for hours. I climbed into the front seat and looked around. The gravel around the car showed fresh tire tracks. They weren't there when I arrived. Someone had parked farther down the road, walked up to my car, circled it, then left. I stepped out slowly and walked around the vehicle. On the rear window, there were smudges, clear handprints, 2 of them, one near the center of the glass, one lower, like someone had leaned in to peer inside. The driver's side window had a faint palm print near the top corner. Not full hand shapes, just enough to see the outline where skin had pressed against the glass. I stared at them for a long time. They weren't mine. I hadn't touched that part of the rear window in days. I walked about 50 yards down the road. There was a small clearing there where a car could have pulled off briefly. The dirt showed fresh tire marks. They had angled in, stopped, then reversed back out toward the main road. Whoever it was didn't stay long after walking around my car. They didn't try to break in, they didn't shout, they didn't escalate, they just checked. That's what it felt like I'd been evaluated. I drove into town and stopped at a gas station to calm down. I considered calling the local sheriff's office, but what would I say? Someone tapped on my window and walked around my car. They'd probably tell me to park somewhere more secure next time. Later that afternoon, I did call the ranger station near the forest. I described the location and what happened. The ranger asked if I'd seen the vehicle. I hadn't. I'd only heard the engine. He said they've had reports of people scouting cars parked overnight along that road, sometimes looking for easy targets, sometimes just checking if someone's sleeping inside. Checking for what? I asked. He paused. Checking if they can get away with something, he said. That answer didn't help. What unsettled me most was the tapping. Not banging, not aggressive. Just soft, deliberate taps. Like someone trying to wake whoever was inside without attracting attention. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I'd sat up and turned on the dome light. If I'd unlocked the door thinking it was a ranger or someone needing help. I don't know what they wanted. Maybe they just wanted to see if anyone was inside before breaking a window. Maybe they were bored and looking for a reaction, but the handprints on the glass made it real. Someone stood inches away from me at 3 in the morning, close enough to leave prints, and decided to circle the car instead of leaving immediately. Now, if I ever sleep in my car again, I don't park on empty forest roads. I park under streetlights. Because at least then, if someone taps on the window, they're not counting on the dark to keep them hidden. He walked past our campsite for the 3rd time, pretending to pick up sticks. It was obvious he wasn't actually gathering firewood. He'd bend down, grab one tiny twig, look at it for a second like he was evaluating it, then toss it aside and keep moving. My name's Dana Whitaker. This happened 2 summers ago when my husband Mark and I went camping at a small county-run campground by Lake Monroe. It wasn't remote, just quiet. Maybe 8 campsites total, arranged in a loose circle. When we pulled in that Friday afternoon, only one other site was occupied. A tan sedan was parked there. No tent yet, just a folding chair and a cooler. We set up our tent, unloaded our gear, and started a small fire. Around 6 p.m., I noticed the man from the other site walking toward ours with his hands in his pockets. He stopped near the tree line, just far enough to technically not be in our site, and looked down at the ground like he'd found something interesting. He was maybe late 40s. Thinning hair, scruffy beard, average build, cargo shorts, and a faded t-shirt. He bent down, picked up a small branch, snapped it in half, and dropped it. Then he kept walking past. Mark leaned toward me and said quietly, "What's he doing?" "Looking for firewood, I guess," I said, but it didn't sound convincing. There was plenty of dead wood scattered around his own site. No reason to cross half the campground. 10 minutes later, he did it again. This time, he slowed down right near our car. He glanced inside through the windows as he walked past. Mark stood up. "Evening," he called. The guy stopped and smiled thinly. "Hey, just seeing if there's any decent wood around." Mark gestured toward the pile we'd stacked near our fire. "There's some back near the bathrooms." The guy nodded. "Yeah, might check that." He didn't go toward the bathrooms. He walked a little farther past our site, then into the trees just beyond. And he stayed there. We couldn't see him, but we could hear him shifting his weight, leaves crunching under his shoes, not moving away, just standing. I felt this tightness in my chest. After about 30 seconds, Mark said loudly, "You find what you're looking for?" There was a pause. Then the man stepped back into view. "Yeah," he said, "just looking." He walked back toward his site. That was the first time it felt off. The second time was after dark. Around 9 p.m., we were sitting by the fire when we saw his silhouette walking the loop again. No flashlight, just pacing slowly. He passed our site, glanced over, and kept going. Then a few minutes later, he came back the other direction. This time, he stopped near our car. Mark stood up again. The guy pretended to examine the ground. "You good?" Mark asked. "Yeah," the guy said. Dropped my lighter somewhere earlier. He wasn't looking at the ground. He was looking at our tent. He eventually wandered back to his site. By 11 p.m., we decided to turn in. We doused the fire completely and zipped up our tent. Before bed, Mark double-checked that our car was locked. I remember hearing the beep when he hit the fob. I was just starting to fall asleep when I heard a soft crunch outside. Not near the fire pit. Near the car. I nudged Mark. "Do you hear that?" He stayed quiet, listening. Another crunch. Slow. Careful. Then nothing. We waited. A few minutes passed, then suddenly the car alarm exploded into the quiet. The horn blared, lights flashed. I jerked upright, heart racing. "What the hell?" Mark said, scrambling for his phone. He unzipped the tent and ran toward the car. I followed close behind. The alarm kept screaming until he hit the fob. It stopped. The campground went dead quiet again. The other guy's site was dark. His chair was still out, his cooler still there, but he wasn't visible. Mark walked around the car, checking the doors. "They're unlocked," he said. I felt my stomach drop. That's not possible, I said immediately. You locked it. I did. He tried each door again, all unlocked. Nothing inside looked stolen. The glove compartment was closed, the center console undisturbed, but the doors had definitely been opened. The interior light had probably triggered the alarm. We both stood there scanning the trees. Hey! Mark shouted into the dark. No answer. No movement. We walked toward the man's campsite. Hello? Mark called. No response. His tent was finally up now, but it was zipped shut. No lights inside. Mark stopped a few feet away. You messing with our car? Silence, I whispered. Let's not. We went back to our site. Mark locked the car again. This time he physically pulled on each handle to make sure. We didn't go back to sleep. We sat in the tent, listening. About 20 minutes later, I heard something again. Footsteps, on gravel, moving slowly along the loop road. They passed our tent, then stopped. I could hear breathing, or maybe it was just my imagination filling in gaps. Mark whispered, if he comes back, we're calling the sheriff. The footsteps eventually moved on. In the morning, we got up as soon as it was light. The other campsite looked normal at first glance, but when I looked closer, I noticed something. There were footprints in the dirt near our car that weren't ours, and near the driver's side door, there were faint smudges on the handle, like someone had tried it more than once. We walked over to his site. It was empty. Tent gone, chair gone, cooler gone. No sign he'd ever been there, except for a small circle of flattened grass. He'd packed up early, quietly. We went straight to the campground office near the entrance. The woman at the desk listened carefully. When we described the guy, she nodded slowly. He was only registered for one night, she said. Checked in late yesterday. Did he say anything about losing a lighter? Mark asked. She shook her head. We told her about the car alarm and the unlocked doors. She frowned. We've had a couple of reports of someone trying car handles at night. Trying, I repeated. She nodded. Just to see what's open. That's what stuck with me. He wasn't frantically breaking in. He was calmly walking past sites, pretending to look for firewood, checking which cars were locked. And when ours wasn't, or when he found a way to unlock it, he must have opened the door quietly enough that we didn't hear it, until the alarm went off. We left that morning instead of staying the second night. On the drive home, I kept replaying how many times he'd walked past our site, how he'd stood just out of sight in the trees, how he'd asked about firewood and a lighter, all excuses to be close. If the alarm hadn't gone off, we might not have known he'd opened the car, and if we hadn't woken up when we did, maybe he would have tried the tent next. Now, when we camp, we don't assume one other camper means safe. Sometimes it just means there's only one person watching. He was standing at the edge of the parking lot with his phone held up like he was photographing something. At first, I assumed it was the mountains behind the trailhead. The view was decent from there. Late afternoon sun, clear sky, early fall. But as I parked and shut off my engine, I realized his phone wasn't pointed at the scenery. It was angled down toward the row of cars, mine included. My name's Caleb Rios. I was 31 at the time. I'd driven out to a popular trailhead about an hour and a half from the city for a solo overnight. Nothing extreme, just a 4-mile hike to a designated backcountry campsite and then back out the next morning. The trailhead parking lot wasn't huge, maybe 15 spaces. When I arrived around 5 p.m., there were only 4 other cars there. The guy stood near a silver SUV, slowly panning his phone across the lot. He wasn't pretending to be subtle, just casually sweeping side to side. I got out of my car and popped the trunk. He glanced at me, then back at his screen. I watched him for a few seconds. He stepped closer to my car, not close enough to touch it, but close enough that I could see his phone angled toward my license plate. Hey, I said. He looked up, almost startled. Hey, you getting the sunset? I asked, even though the sun was behind us. Yeah, he said quickly. Just some shots. He didn't move his phone toward the mountains. It stayed low, hovering at bumper height. I nodded slowly and started unloading my pack. He walked past me toward the back of the lot, phone still in hand. I watched him take what looked like 2 more photos of cars. Then he slipped his phone into his pocket and got into a dark blue sedan parked near the edge. He didn't leave right away. He just sat there. I debated saying something else, but decided against it. Maybe I was being paranoid. People take weird photos for weird reasons. I locked my car and started the hike. The campsite area was about 40 minutes in, a small clearing with 3 designated tent pads. No one else was there. The hike itself was uneventful. Clear trail, quiet woods. I set up my tent around 6:30 and made a quick dinner. But I kept thinking about the guy at the parking lot. It didn't make sense to photograph license plates unless you had a reason. I told myself maybe he was doing some kind of parking survey. Maybe he worked for the Forest Service. Still, something about the way he didn't answer directly bothered me. Around 10 p.m., I zipped up my tent and turned in. It got colder quickly after sunset. No wind, just that deep, empty quiet you get in the woods at night. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a faint crunch. Gravel. My first thought was deer, but deer don't usually make that distinct gravel on gravel sound. I lay still and listened. Another crunch. Closer. The campsite clearing had a small gravel patch near the trail entrance. Whoever it was had stepped onto it. My heart started thudding. There shouldn't have been anyone else up there. The parking lot had only had a few cars, and I hadn't passed anyone on the trail. The crunching stopped right outside my tent. I could feel someone standing there. Then I saw it. A faint rectangle of light against the fabric. A phone screen. It glowed bright white for a second, then dimmed. I held my breath. The light shifted slightly like the person was angling the screen, maybe checking something. Then it brightened again. Not a flashlight, not a headlamp, just a phone screen lighting up inches from my tent wall. My mind raced. Were they checking a map, taking a photo, messaging someone? I whispered hello. The light froze. Silence. Then it went dark. I heard a slow step backward, then another. The gravel crunched again, moving away toward the trail. I scrambled up and unzipped the tent fast, grabbing my headlamp. By the time I stepped out, the clearing was empty. No one on the trail, no visible lights moving through the trees. I stood there listening. After about 30 seconds, I heard something else. An engine, faint at first, then louder. Coming from the direction of the parking lot. My stomach dropped. That meant whoever had been standing outside my tent hadn't hiked up from somewhere else. They'd come from the trailhead, specifically from the parking lot. I didn't sleep much after that. At dawn, I packed up quickly and hiked back down. The trail felt longer that morning. When I reached the parking lot, my car was still there. But something was off. The dirt and gravel behind my car showed fresh tire tracks, deep ones, like another vehicle had pulled in directly behind mine, close enough that I would have had trouble backing out. I walked around and looked closer. The tracks weren't from the cars that had been there when I arrived. They were newer, cutting across older marks. Whoever it was had parked directly behind me at some point during the night, and then left. I looked around the lot. Only 2 other cars were there now. One was an older pickup with a family loading hiking gear. The other was empty. I checked the ground more carefully. The fresh tracks curved in from the entrance, stopped directly behind my car, then turned sharply and pulled away. There were no other signs of someone unloading gear. No footprints leading up the trail from that spot. It looked like someone had driven in, positioned themselves behind my car, idled, then left. I thought about the phone light against my tent wall, the guy taking photos of license plates, the car engine I heard right after. It could have been coincidence. But it didn't feel like it. I went into the small ranger station near the lot and told them what happened. The ranger listened and asked for a description of the man and the sedan. When I mentioned him photographing plates, the ranger's expression changed slightly. He said they'd had reports of someone casing vehicles at trailheads, taking pictures, then coming back at night to see which cars were still there. If a car stayed overnight, that meant the owner was camping somewhere up the trail, which meant they weren't near their vehicle. I felt sick hearing that. The ranger said sometimes thieves break into cars or steal catalytic converters. Other times they follow the trail to look for unattended campsites. He wrote down my information and said they'd increase patrols. I drove home with my eyes flicking constantly to the rearview mirror. Nothing followed me. Nothing else happened. But the image that stays with me is that rectangle of light against the tent fabric. Not a random hiker passing through. Someone who knew my car was in that lot. Someone who had likely photographed it hours earlier. And someone who came up the trail in the middle of the night to confirm I was there. When I think about how close that phone screen was to my face through a thin layer of nylon, I realize how easy it is to track someone without them even knowing. Now, if I see someone photographing a parking lot at a trailhead, I don't assume it's scenery. He walked straight into our campsite like he belonged there. No, hey, no warning, just came out of the trees and stopped about 10 feet from the fire pit. It was me and my older brother Nate. This was 2 summers ago, mid-July. We were camping at a small national forest campground that doesn't take reservations. First come, first served. It was humid that weekend, one of those thick, sticky afternoons where even sitting still makes you sweat. We'd gotten there around noon and picked a site near the edge of the loop. Not completely isolated, but not right next to anyone either. There were maybe 3 other sites occupied in the whole place. Around 5 p.m., we were cooking burgers over the fire when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. I looked up, and there he was. A man in his 40s, maybe. Tall, skinny, dirty jeans, gray t-shirt, boots. He had short hair and a face that looked kind of blank, like he wasn't sure what expression to use. He just stood there. I remember thinking at first that he must be about to ask something, but he didn't. Nate looked up too. "Hey," he said, casual. The guy nodded once, then he said, "You guys seen a dog?" That was it. No description, no name. "What kind of dog?" I asked. He paused like he had to think about it. "Brown, medium." That's all he offered. We both glanced around automatically. Our sight was open enough that you'd hear a dog crashing through brush. "No," Nate said. "Haven't seen one." The guy didn't react much. He just shifted his weight and looked past us. His eyes moved slowly over our cooler, the truck, our tents. "How long you been here?" he asked. "Couple hours," Nate replied. The guy nodded again. I waited for him to leave. He didn't. He just stood there. Not aggressive, not smiling. Just there. I felt this weird pressure in my chest, like the air got heavier. "You camping here too?" I asked. He pointed vaguely toward the other side of the loop. "Down there." We hadn't seen him set up earlier, but I guess it was possible. "What's the dog's name?" I asked. Another pause. "Buddy." It didn't sound convincing. There had been no barking, no whistling, no calling out before he walked into our sight. He kept looking at our gear, the folding chairs, the lantern hanging from a branch, the tailgate of Nate's truck. After maybe 30 seconds of silence, Nate said, "Well, hope you find him." The guy looked at Nate for a long moment. Then he nodded again, but he still didn't move. I started feeling irritated. "Anything else?" I asked. That seemed to snap him out of it a little. "Nah," he said. "Just looking." Then he turned and walked back into the trees the same way he came. We both watched until he disappeared. "That was weird," I said. "Yeah," Nate replied. "No dog." If someone loses a dog, they usually sound stressed. They call its name. They move quickly. That guy didn't seem concerned at all. We didn't see him again that evening, but around sunset, we heard something. A truck engine idling somewhere down the loop. Not unusual by itself, but it stayed idling for a long time. When I walked toward the bathroom later, I noticed a white pickup parked at a site 2 down from ours. No tent, no chairs, just the truck. Same guy sitting in the driver's seat. He was looking in our direction. When he saw me notice him, he looked down at his phone. I went back to our site and told Nate, "Let's just keep an eye on things," he said. That night, it stayed hot, even after dark. No wind. You could hear everything. Around 11 p.m., after we'd put out the fire and crawled into our tents, I heard footsteps on gravel, not on the main road, closer. I unzipped my tent quietly and looked out. The white pickup was still there, parked the same way. No lights on. Then I saw him. He was walking slowly between sites, not calling for a dog, not shining a flashlight, just moving at a normal pace. He stopped near our truck. I froze. He stood by the driver's side door for a few seconds. Then he walked toward the back, near the cooler. I cleared my throat loudly. He turned his head toward my tent. "You find your dog?" I called. He stared at me for a second, then shook his head once. "Still looking," he said. "Good luck," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. He just walked back toward his truck. He didn't leave the campground. He got in and shut the door, but the engine didn't start. He just sat there. I stayed awake for a long time after that, listening. At some point, I must have dozed off. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of a car door closing. I peeked out again. The truck was gone. But I heard something else. Footsteps. Coming from behind my tent. I sat up fully. "Hello?" I said quietly. The footsteps stopped, then they continued, moving away toward the trees. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. I saw a shadow moving between the trunks. Tall, same build. He didn't run. He just walked until the darkness swallowed him. I didn't sleep again. At first light, Nate and I compared notes. He'd heard the same footsteps near his tent. We packed up right away. As we loaded the truck, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. In the dirt near our cooler, there were faint shoe prints. Not from us, different tread. They led from the direction of his old campsite to ours. I walked over to where his truck had been parked. No tent, no fire ring used. Just tire tracks and some cigarette butts on the ground. No sign of a dog anywhere. On our way out, we stopped by the campground host's RV. An older couple ran the place. I described the guy in the white pickup. The host frowned and said, "Yeah, he's been around before." "Looking for a dog?" Nate asked. The host gave a tight smile. "That's what he says." He told us they've had complaints about someone wandering into sites after dark, asking about a lost dog. No reports of theft or violence, just people feeling uncomfortable. They'd asked him to leave before. "He always says he's just looking," the host said. That's what got to me. Just looking. At what? At who? He never described the dog beyond brown, never called its name, never showed any urgency. He stood in our sight long enough to memorize where everything was. And he came back after dark. Maybe he was harmless. Maybe he really did lose a dog at some point, and it became his excuse to walk around campsites. But the way he stood there, scanning our stuff, not leaving when the conversation was over, that didn't feel like someone searching for a pet. We didn't stick around to find out. We left before 8 a.m. Now, whenever I hear someone mention a lost dog at a campsite, I think about that guy standing in our clearing, silent, watching, like he was waiting to see if we'd give him a reason to stay. I woke up because I had to pee, and the first thing I noticed was the zipper. It was open about 3 inches at the bottom. Not a lot. Just enough that a strip of cold air was sliding in across my face. I froze there in my sleeping bag, staring at it. My name's Ethan Mercer. I was camping alone that weekend at a small state park about 40 minutes from where I live. Nothing extreme, just a regular campground with spaced out sites and basic bathrooms. It was early May, still chilly at night. I'd gone to bed around 11 after reading for a while, and I always double-check the zipper. I'm weird about that. I hate bugs getting in. Before I fall asleep, I run my fingers along the zipper line to make sure it's fully sealed. I remember doing it that night, but there it was, slightly open. I told myself I must have kicked it in my sleep. Maybe my foot pressed against the wall and tugged it down. Then I noticed my backpack. It had been leaning upright against the back corner of the tent when I went to bed. I'm careful about where I put things. I don't like clutter in a small space. Now it was near the door, on its side, closer to the opening. I didn't remember moving it. My stomach tightened. I slowly reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam lit up the inside of the tent. The zipper was definitely down a few inches. The backpack's top flap was unbuckled. I sat up slowly, heart thudding in my ears. I hadn't heard anything during the night. No footsteps, no voices, no tent fabric moving. I looked around at the rest of my stuff. Sleeping pad, shoes, water bottle, everything else looked normal. I crawled toward the door and zipped it shut the rest of the way. The sound felt too loud in the quiet. Then I grabbed the backpack and pulled it toward me. The main compartment was unzipped about halfway. I never leave it like that. I always close it fully so mice or raccoons don't get into it if I'm distracted. My hands were shaking as I opened it fully and checked inside. Wallet still there. Headlamp, extra clothes, food bag, nothing missing. That somehow made it worse. If someone had stolen something, at least I'd know what they wanted. Instead, it felt like someone had opened it just to look. I held my breath and listened. Outside, it was dead quiet. No wind. No nearby campers talking. The campground had only been half full earlier that evening. Most sites were families with kids who'd gone to bed early. I needed to pee, but suddenly I didn't want to open that tent. I stayed there for a solid minute, trying to decide if I was overreacting. Maybe I really had shifted the bag earlier and forgotten. Maybe the zipper slipped down on its own. They're not perfect, but the flap being unbuckled, the compartment opened halfway, I didn't buy it. I unzipped the tent slowly and looked out. The moon was bright enough to see the outlines of trees and picnic tables. My car was parked about 15 feet away. No one standing around. No shadows moving. I stepped out, scanning left and right. My campsite looked normal. The fire pit was cold. The chair I'd left out was still there. I walked a slow circle around the tent, barefoot on the gravel. Nothing. I checked the ground near the door. The dirt was hard packed, but I thought I saw faint impressions. Could have been from earlier when I set up. I couldn't tell. I used the bathroom quickly and came back. Before getting back in, I crouched down and looked closely at the zipper area from the outside. No tears, no damage, just the zipper slightly pulled down from the inside. That detail stuck with me, from the inside. I got back into the tent and zipped it all the way up again. I sat there with my back against the wall, phone light off, listening. About 5 minutes later, I heard something, a soft crunch on gravel, close, not right at the tent, maybe 10 feet away. I held my breath. Another step. Slow, careful. My pulse shot up. I didn't move this time. I didn't turn on the light. The footsteps stopped. Silence. I whispered, "Hello?" No answer. I reached for my car keys and hit the lock button. The lights flashed and the horn chirped once. Immediately, I heard faster footsteps moving away toward the tree line. Not running full speed, but quick enough that it wasn't casual. I scrambled to the tent door and unzipped it fast, shining my phone light out. I caught a glimpse of someone's back, disappearing between the trees at the edge of my sight. Dark hoodie, medium build, head down. They didn't look back. I stepped out fully, but I wasn't about to chase someone into the woods at 2 a.m. My legs felt weak. I stood there listening as the footsteps faded. After a few seconds, I heard a car door close somewhere beyond the trees. Then an engine start. Headlights flashed briefly through the branches. A vehicle drove off down the campground road. I stayed outside until I couldn't hear it anymore. Then I walked to the edge of my site and looked down the road. 2 sites over, I noticed a car that hadn't been there earlier in the evening, a small sedan, parked crooked in the spot. No tent set up, no chairs, no signs of actual camping. I hadn't paid attention when I went to bed, but I was almost certain that site had been empty. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I walked over to that site. The car was gone. The ground showed fresh tire tracks in the dirt. No tent marks, no fire pit used, just the car having been there. I went straight to the ranger station when it opened at 8. The ranger listened while I explained about the zipper, the backpack, the footsteps, the car. When I described the bag being opened but nothing taken, he nodded slowly. He said they've had issues with people testing tents at night, seeing if anyone's inside, looking for easy targets. Sometimes they unzip slightly to see if someone reacts. Sometimes they go through bags quickly, hoping for wallets or electronics. He said if I hadn't woken up to pee, I might not have noticed until morning. That thought made my stomach twist, because the zipper had been opened from the inside, which means at some point during the night, someone had slid their hand inside my tent. Just enough to pull it down, just enough to reach in and drag my backpack closer to the door. I keep replaying that part. I sleep pretty deeply. I wouldn't have felt someone's hand brushing the inside of the tent wall. They could have been inches from my face, and I wouldn't have known. Nothing was stolen, nothing damaged, but someone stood there in the dark, opened my tent slightly, reached in, and moved my things around while I was asleep. I packed up that morning and left. Now, when I camp, I clip a small carabiner through the zipper pulls so they can't slide quietly. It doesn't make me feel completely safe. It just makes it harder for someone to test whether I'm paying attention. The car drove past us the first time just after it got dark. We were camped about 3 miles off a Forest Service road outside of Oak Ridge. No official campground, just a pull-off spot we'd used before. It was me, my buddy Kevin, and our friend Luis. We'd parked Kevin's Tacoma facing the road and set our tents a little deeper into the trees, maybe 20 feet back. It was early September. Still warm during the day, cooler at night. No rain, no wind, just quiet. The road we were on isn't a through road. It dead ends at a trailhead another mile down. If someone drives past you, they either have a campsite farther up or they're turning around. Around 9:15 p.m., we were sitting by the fire when we heard an engine coming up the road. Headlights appeared between the trees, moving slow. Someone else Coming up, Kevin said. The car passed our clearing at maybe 5 miles an hour. Older sedan, dark color, I couldn't tell the make. The windows were down. I saw a guy driving, maybe late 30s or 40s, short hair. Didn't look over at us, but he had to see the fire. We all watched as he continued down the road. Guess someone's at the trailhead, Luis said. We didn't think much of it. About 10 minutes later, we heard the engine again. Same car, same slow speed. This time, he came from the direction of the trailhead, so he'd reached the end, turned around, and was coming back. Still slow, slower than necessary. He passed us again. This time, he did look over. Not a wave, not a nod, just a steady look as he rolled by. Then he continued down toward the main road. Kevin frowned. That's weird. Maybe he was checking for a spot and didn't like what he saw. Or checking us out, Luis added. We joked about it for a minute, but it lingered. About 20 minutes later, the engine came back. We all went quiet. Third time, Kevin said. The car came from the main road direction now. Same slow crawl, same dark sedan. He passed our spot again. This time, he slowed even more, almost to a stop. I could see his face in the firelight as he rolled by, expressionless, eyes fixed on our clearing. Dude, Luis muttered. The car continued past us toward the trailhead again. We listened as the engine faded into the distance. He's just driving loops, Kevin said. There's no reason to keep doing that. There were no other campsites between us and the trailhead. We'd driven the road earlier that day. Ours was the only obvious clearing big enough for a vehicle. When the engine came back again about 15 minutes later, we were all standing. This is getting old, Kevin said. The car approached slowly. Then, instead of continuing past, it slowed almost to a stop right in front of our clearing. For a second, I thought he was going to pull in, but he didn't. He idled there, half in the road, half angled slightly toward us. Then, after maybe 10 seconds, he continued down the road toward the main entrance again. We didn't talk much after that. The fire suddenly felt smaller. By 11 p.m., we decided to turn in. We doused the fire completely and crawled into our tents. Kevin and Luis shared one tent. I had my own. I lay there listening. The road was quiet for a while. Around midnight, I heard distant tires on gravel. My stomach tightened immediately. The engine grew louder as it approached. This time, it didn't pass. Headlights flooded through the fabric of my tent so bright it lit up the entire interior like daytime. I froze. The lights were angled directly at our campsite, not driving by, pointed at us. I could hear the engine idling, 30 feet away, maybe less. I didn't unzip. I didn't move. From Kevin's tent, I heard a whisper. You awake? Yeah, I whispered back. The headlights stayed on for maybe 5 seconds. Then they shut off. Complete darkness. But the engine kept running. The idling sound filled the clearing. I tried to count in my head to keep from panicking. 1, 2, 3. I got to about 40 before I lost track. He just sat there. No doors opening. No footsteps. Just the steady hum of the engine. Luis whispered, "What is he doing?" No one answered. After what felt like forever but was probably around a minute, the engine revved slightly. Then the car slowly backed up, tires crunching on gravel, like it turned around somewhere near the bend in the road. Then it drove off toward the main road. We stayed completely still for another 5 minutes. Kevin finally unzipped his tent quietly and stepped out. "I'm grabbing the truck keys," he whispered. We all got out then. The clearing felt wrong now, too exposed. Kevin moved his Tacoma so it faced outward toward the road instead of sideways. He left the keys in the ignition. We debated leaving right then. "It's almost 1 a.m., Luis said. "We'll be driving tired." "Or he comes back again," Kevin replied. We compromised and stayed awake for another half hour, sitting in the truck with the doors locked, lights off. The car didn't return. Eventually, we went back to our tents, but none of us slept much. Around 2:30 a.m., I thought I heard distant engine noise again, but it never got close. At first light, we packed up fast. As we were loading gear into the truck, I noticed something on the road just past our clearing. Fresh tire marks. They weren't just straight lines from passing by. There were turn marks, like someone had pulled partially into our entrance and then backed out. Kevin crouched to look at them. "He started to come in," he said. There was enough space for the sedan to have turned fully into our campsite if he wanted. He just chose not to. On the drive out, we didn't see the car. At the main road, Kevin stopped and called the local ranger district office. He explained what happened. The person on the phone didn't sound shocked. She said they occasionally get reports of someone driving that road late at night, checking camps. I asked what that meant. She paused and said, "Just keep an eye out and report suspicious activity." That wasn't comforting. The part that stuck with me wasn't the looping. It was the headlights. He waited until we were in our tents, until it was fully dark. Then he pulled close enough to light the inside of my tent from 30 feet away. He wanted us to know he was there. He wanted to see if we'd come out. If one of us had stepped out alone, half asleep, maybe annoyed instead of cautious, I don't know what would have happened. Maybe nothing. Maybe he just liked scaring people. But the way he idled there, engine running, lights off, just listening, that didn't feel random. We don't camp off that road anymore. Now, when I hear a car at night in the woods, I don't assume it's someone looking for a spot. I assume they're looking at us. The rock was sitting right on top of my tent zipper when I unzipped it in the morning. Not near it, not on the ground by accident. Directly on the little fabric flap where the two zippers meet, like someone had placed it there carefully. I just stared at it for a few seconds, still half asleep. My name's Connor Hale. I was 29 when this happened. I'd hiked about 6 miles into a backcountry area around Lake Everett. No car camping, no established sites, just dispersed camping allowed as long as you're a certain distance from the trail and water. I'd done solo trips before. I liked the quiet. It was late August. Warm days, cool nights. The first night had been completely uneventful. I set up my tent about 100 yards from the shoreline, tucked between some trees, but with a clear view of the lake through the trunks. No other tents in sight. I hadn't seen another person after the first mile of the hike in. The second morning when I woke up, I reached up to unzip the tent like usual and felt resistance. That's when I saw the rock. It was smooth and gray, about the size of a golf ball. Heavy enough that the zipper wouldn't move unless I brushed it off. I knew immediately it wasn't mine. I hadn't used rocks to secure anything. The ground around my tent was dirt and pine needles, not loose stones. I pushed it off and unzipped the tent, stepping outside slowly. The campsite looked normal. My pack leaned against a tree. My boots were where I left them. The lake was calm, early morning light reflecting off it. But the rock bothered me more the longer I thought about it. I'm very particular when I camp. I always double-check the zipper before bed. I make sure it's fully closed because of bugs. I would have noticed a rock sitting there. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it fell from a tree, but there were no rocks in the branches above me, and it was placed exactly where the zipper pull was. I walked around the tent, scanning the ground. That's when I saw the footprints. They were faint at first, just slight impressions in the dirt leading from the direction of the lake toward my campsite. Not animal tracks. Boots. I crouched down to look closer. Clear heel marks, defined tread pattern. They came straight from the shoreline. I followed them with my eyes. The prints approached the back of my tent, curved around one side, stopped near the door, right where the zipper was, and then continued back the same way they came. No wandering, no circling beyond that, just a direct path there and back. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't heard anything during the night. No snapping twigs, no voices, nothing. I looked toward the lake. From where I stood, I could see about 50 yards of open shoreline. Empty. Whoever it was had either been extremely quiet or come while I was in deep sleep. I scanned the waterline. There were no boats pulled up nearby, no kayaks, no obvious sign of someone camping close. I didn't panic. Not yet. I told myself it could have been another hiker passing through. Maybe they thought my tent was abandoned and came closer to check. Maybe the rock was some weird attempt to see if I'd moved it by morning. But that didn't explain why they'd walk all the way from the shoreline directly to my zipper and then leave. I debated packing up right then. Instead, I decided to stay alert and see if I noticed anything during the day. I spent most of the morning fishing near the lake. Every so often, I glanced back toward my campsite through the trees. Nothing moved. Around noon, I walked the shoreline farther out in both directions. About 200 yards to the east, I found another set of footprints near a shallow entry point into the water. Same tread pattern, same size. There were drag marks too, like something had been pulled onto shore briefly. Maybe a small boat. I followed those tracks up into the trees, but they faded quickly on harder ground. That's when I started to feel exposed. If someone had come by boat, they could approach silently. No trail noise, no crunching gravel, just a quiet landing and a short walk through the trees. And I'd picked this spot because it felt remote. I went back to camp and moved a few things around. I repositioned my tent slightly so I'd have a clearer view of the direction the footprints came from. I also strung up a small line with a metal cup clipped to it near the back of the tent. Not a real alarm, just something that would make noise if bumped. That evening, I kept the fire small and went to bed earlier than usual. I was tired from hiking and fishing, but my brain wouldn't shut off. Every little sound made me tense. Around 1 a.m., I heard something, a soft splash. Not close to the tent, out on the lake. I held my breath and listened. Another faint sound, like water against something solid, a boat. I reached for my headlamp but didn't turn it on. I just lay there, listening. After a minute, I heard the faintest scrape, like something sliding against sand, then silence. My heart started pounding in my ears. I waited. A few minutes passed. Nothing. Then a crunch. Behind the tent, not near the lake this time, closer. The metal cup on the line didn't move, but I heard a distinct footstep in dirt. Slow. Careful. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Another step. The sound stopped about 10 feet from the tent. I could picture someone standing there, looking at the silhouette of my body through the fabric. I forced myself to act. I grabbed my headlamp and clicked it on, then shouted as loud as I could, "Hey! I see you!" I didn't, but I wanted them to think I did. There was an immediate reaction this time. Fast footsteps, not running full speed but quick, retreating toward the lake. I scrambled out of the tent, light bouncing wildly. I caught a glimpse of someone's back disappearing between trees. Dark jacket, average build. They didn't look back. By the time I reached the shoreline, there was only the lake. But I heard it, the soft push of something leaving shore. I scanned the water with the headlamp. About 40 yards out, I saw the faint outline of a small canoe. No lights, just a dark shape moving steadily across the surface. I stood there until it blended into the darkness. I didn't sleep after that. At first light, I packed up everything. Before leaving, I checked the ground again. Fresh footprints from the night before. Same tread. They'd stopped closer this time, maybe 8 feet from the tent. If I hadn't yelled, I don't know if they would have stepped closer. I hiked out as fast as I could without looking like I was panicking. Every time I heard a branch snap behind me, I turned around. At the ranger station near the trailhead, I reported it. The ranger asked a few questions. When I mentioned the canoe, he nodded slowly. He said sometimes people camp illegally on the far side of the lake and paddle around at night, fishing, exploring, or just being where they shouldn't be. I asked if there had been incidents before. He hesitated, then said they've had complaints about someone approaching campsites after dark. No thefts reported, just people feeling watched. That part stuck with me. Who paddles silently across a lake in the middle of the night just to stand near someone's tent? The rock on the zipper feels deliberate, like he wanted to see if I'd notice, like he was testing whether I was paying attention. If I hadn't checked in the morning, I might have assumed nothing happened the first night, and if I hadn't yelled the second night, maybe he would have stepped closer again. I still hike, I still camp, but I don't camp near lakes anymore, not alone, because now I know how quiet water can be, and how easy it is for someone to stand outside your tent close enough to reach out and touch it, and you wouldn't even know until they decide to leave. My dog started growling at exactly 2:07 a.m. I know the time because I checked my phone as soon as it woke me up. 1 second everything was quiet, just the sound of wind moving through the trees, and the next, Daisy was up on her elbows, stiff as a board, letting out this low, steady growl I'd never heard from her before. Not barking, not alert, just a deep, controlled sound in her chest. We were camping at Pine Ridge Campground, about 2 hours outside of town. It was mid-June, warm during the day but cool at night. I'd taken a Friday off work for a long weekend, just me and Daisy. She's a 5-year-old lab mix, super mellow. She doesn't react to much. Squirrels, other dogs, strangers, nothing really gets to her. That's why it scared me. She was facing the side wall of the tent, not the door, not toward the road, just the thin fabric to my right. I whispered, "Daisy." She didn't look at me, didn't blink, just kept staring at that spot, growling low and steady. At first, I thought maybe a raccoon had wandered too close, or a deer. We were in a wooded site, trees pretty tight around us. Animals happen, but Daisy has seen deer before. She'll usually just wag her tail or ignore them. This was different. Her hackles were up along her back. I could feel it when I touched her. Then I heard it. A soft crunch in the dirt right outside the tent. Not quick, not scurrying. A shift of weight, like someone adjusting their stance. My whole body went cold. The tent wall was maybe 2 feet from my face. I stared at it, trying to see through it. The moonlight outside gave the fabric a faint glow. Daisy's growl got a little louder. "Hey," I said, my voice barely working. "Hello?" The crunch came again, just one step. I reached for my headlamp that I keep looped around the top of the tent pole. My hand was shaking enough that I fumbled it once before getting it on. I clicked it. The beam lit up the inside of the tent first, blinding me for a second. Then I turned my head toward the wall, and I saw it. A shadow, right there against the fabric. Tall, human-shaped. Close enough that the outline was clear. It shifted slightly when the light hit it. Not a jump, not a panic, just a small adjustment, like whoever it was leaned back half an inch. Daisy's growl turned into a single sharp bark. The shadow didn't run. That's what I keep thinking about. If it had been some drunk guy wandering through campsites, I would expect him to bolt when a light snapped on and a dog barked. Instead, the shadow moved slowly to the left. One step, then another. I could see the shape slide along the tent wall, staying close for a second before pulling away. I scrambled up to my knees and unzipped the tent door fast, pointing the headlamp out into the trees. There was a man about 15 feet away, walking toward the tree line. He wasn't sprinting, he wasn't even looking back, just walking at a normal pace. "Hey!" I yelled. He kept walking. He wore a dark hoodie and jeans, average height, medium build. I couldn't see his face clearly from behind. The hood was up. "Get out of here," I shouted. He stepped into the trees and disappeared between the trunks. I stood there for a few seconds, heart pounding so hard I felt dizzy. Daisy pushed past me halfway out of the tent, but didn't chase. She just stood stiff beside me, staring into the woods, growling again. I grabbed my car keys from inside and hit the panic button. My car was parked about 20 feet away. The horn blared and the lights flashed. The campground stayed quiet. No other lights came on. No voices, just the echo of my car alarm bouncing through the trees. I let it run for a few seconds, then shut it off. I didn't go after him. There was no way I was stepping into those trees at 2 in the morning. Instead, I walked a wide circle around my campsite with the headlamp. The ground was dry dirt and scattered pine needles. I found footprints almost immediately. Fresh. Leading right up to the side of my tent where Daisy had been growling. Boot prints, deep enough that I could see the tread pattern. They circled halfway around the tent. He'd walked past the door, past my car, chosen the side where my head was. There were no other prints coming from the main path. He'd approached from deeper in the woods, not the road. That meant he hadn't just been passing through. He'd come from behind the campsite. I got back into the tent and zipped it up. My hands were shaking so bad it took me 2 tries. Daisy didn't lie down again. She sat facing the door this time, ears up. I stayed awake until morning. Every little sound made me flinch. At one point, around 3:30, I thought I heard movement again, but it turned out to be wind pushing branches together. Daisy didn't react, so I tried to breathe through it. When the sky finally started turning gray, I got out immediately. I walked the area again, this time in better light. The footprints were clearer than I'd realized. They came from about 30 yards back in the trees. There was a faint path there, not an official trail, just a worn-down line through brush. I followed the prints a short distance until they merged with other disturbed dirt and disappeared. About 50 yards beyond that, I found something that made my stomach drop. An empty campsite. Not an official one, just a flat patch someone had used. No tent set up, but there were signs someone had been there recently. A flattened spot in the grass, a couple of crushed beer cans, a small pile of ash like a fire had been there, and tire tracks. He hadn't been camping in the loop like normal people. He'd parked somewhere off the main campground and walked in through the woods. That meant he'd chosen my site deliberately. Mine was one of the more tucked away spots in the loop. Fewer neighbors, less visibility from the road. I went straight to the park office as soon as they opened at 8. The ranger, a guy named Mike, according to his name tag, listened while I explained everything. When I described the shadow against the tent, he didn't interrupt, just nodded slowly. He asked if I'd seen a vehicle nearby. I told him about the off-trail tire tracks. He sighed and said they'd had issues with people illegally camping outside designated areas. Some of them wander into occupied sites at night. He didn't sugarcoat it. He said sometimes they're looking to steal coolers or gear. Sometimes they're just curious. That word bothered me. Curious enough to stand inches from someone's head at 2 a.m. He said they'd patrol the back section more often and told me to call 911 immediately if it happened again. He took down my information. I packed up right after that. The whole drive home, Daisy was unusually quiet in the back seat. Normally, she pants and looks out the window. That day, she just lay down. What keeps replaying in my head isn't the footsteps or even the shadow. It's how close he was. He wasn't rummaging through my stuff. He wasn't making noise at the cooler or the car. He was standing right by the side of my tent where I was sleeping, and he stayed there long enough for Daisy to wake up, assess, and start growling. If she hadn't made a sound, I don't know how long he would have stood there, or what he would have done next. I still take Daisy camping, just not alone anymore. And I don't pick the tucked away sites in the back. I stay where there are other people within earshot, because now I know how easy it is for someone to step out of the trees and stand inches away from you, and you'd never know until your dog decides it's time to growl. Around midnight, I woke up because I thought I heard someone walking. At first, I told myself it was just one of those half-dream things. When you're camping alone, every little sound feels bigger. Wind in the trees, raccoons, branches settling. But this was different. It was slow, measured. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause, like someone trying not to hurry. I was at Red Hollow State Park. I've been there a bunch of times. It's about an hour from my apartment, cheap campsites, decent hiking trails. I'm not some hardcore survival guy, but I like going out alone once in a while to clear my head. I'm 32, my name's Aaron Delgado, and camping alone never really bothered me before. It was early October, so the air was cold but not freezing. I'd gone to bed around 10:30. No rain, just a quiet, clear night. I had a small fire earlier, cooked some sausages, put it out properly, zipped myself into my sleeping bag, and passed out. The crunch came again. Definitely footsteps. Not fast, not wandering randomly. They were circling. My tent is one of those two-person dome tents. Not huge. The nylon walls aren't thick. You can hear everything. Crunch. Pause. I held my breath. I could actually track it. The sound moved from my left side toward the back of the tent. It didn't sound like an animal. No sniffing, no scrambling, just steady weight shifting onto gravel. I told myself it was probably another camper cutting through sites. The campground wasn't full, but there were a few other tents scattered around. Maybe someone got turned around coming back from the bathroom. Still, who walks that slow? I reached for my phone and checked the time. 12:14 a.m. The footsteps stopped. I lay there for a good 30 seconds, staring at the ceiling of the tent, waiting for them to start again. Nothing. Just distant wind in the trees. I felt stupid, but my heart was pounding. Finally, I unzipped the tent door about 6 inches and looked out. My campsite was lit only by moonlight. My car was parked about 15 feet away. The picnic table sat empty. Fire pit, cooler, backpack, all where I left them. No one there. I unzipped a little more and leaned out, turning my head slowly. Nothing moving between the trees. No flashlights. No voices. I stepped out barefoot onto the cold gravel. The ground crunched under me, loud in the quiet. I walked a slow circle around my tent. Nothing. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it really was an animal and I just didn't recognize the sound. I got back inside, zipped up, and tried to calm down. About 10 minutes later, it started again. Crunch. Pause. This time it was closer, right near the front of the tent where the zipper is. I froze. I could hear it clearly now. Someone taking deliberate steps, stopping, then moving again. The steps traced along the right side of the tent. I whispered, "Hello?" Not loud, just enough. The footsteps stopped immediately. Silence pressed in so hard it made my ears ring. "Hey," I said, a little louder. "Can I help you?" Nothing. No response, no movement. I could hear my own breathing inside the tent. After maybe a minute, I grabbed the small flashlight I keep in the side pocket and unzipped fast this time. I swung the beam around the campsite. Empty. The light caught tree trunks, the edge of the road, my car. No one. No shadows moving away. No other campers nearby with lights on. I stepped out again, this time shining the light wider, walking farther out toward the tree line behind my sight. I swept the beam between trunks, just leaves and dirt. If someone had been there, they would have had to move fast, and I didn't hear anyone running. I went back in, zipped up, and this time I locked my car with the key fob just to hear the chirp. I don't know why, it just made me feel less alone. The third time it happened, it was slower. I must have drifted off for a few minutes because I woke up to the sound already mid-step. Crunch. Then another step, closer to the head of my tent. The nylon wall brushed slightly inward like something had barely touched it. I stopped breathing entirely. Whoever it was wasn't just passing through. They were staying. I could hear them shifting weight from one foot to the other. The faint scrape of gravel under a boot. Boot. That's what it sounded like. Not pause. I didn't say anything this time. I didn't unzip. I just lay there, staring at the outline of the tent wall inches from my face. Slowly, the footsteps moved again. Around the back. Then to the left side, completing a full circle. They stopped directly in front of the zipper. I could see a faint shadow through the fabric, darker than the rest of the night. Tall. Still. We stayed like that for maybe 20 seconds. It felt longer. Then without a word, the shadow shifted away. Crunch. Crunch. Fading toward the trees. I didn't chase this time. I didn't unzip. I just lay there until I couldn't hear anything at all. I didn't sleep again. When the sky started to lighten around 6:30, I got up immediately. My hands were shaking when I unzipped the tent. The first thing I saw was the ground. Boot prints. Fresh, deep impressions in the dirt and gravel, circling the tent. You could follow them clearly. They went all the way around, at least twice. They stopped right in front of the tent door, right where my head had been. I crouched down and looked closer. Definitely boots. Not hiking sneakers. The tread was heavy, almost work boot style. Size looked bigger than mine. Then I saw the cigarette butts, 3 of them, right by the tent entrance, crushed into the dirt. I don't smoke. Never have. I hadn't had a campfire after 10. No one had reason to be that close. The butts were still slightly damp from morning dew. They hadn't been there when I went to sleep. I'm sure of that. I cleaned the site before setting up. I stood up slowly and looked around. About 50 yards away, through the trees, I noticed a pickup truck parked off the main road in a little cutout area that isn't an official campsite. It hadn't been there the evening before. Dark blue. Older model. No one visible inside. I watched it for a minute, feeling my stomach tighten. I couldn't see plates from that angle. I didn't want to walk closer. I didn't want whoever was inside to see me studying it. Instead, I packed up as fast as I could without looking like I was panicking. Sleeping bag stuffed in, tent down, cooler in the trunk. Every few seconds I glanced toward the truck. At one point, I swear I saw movement in the driver's seat, just a slight shift. When I closed my trunk, the truck engine started. That sound made my whole body go cold. The pickup pulled slowly out of the cutout and rolled past my campsite on the road. The windows were tinted, but not fully dark. As it passed, I saw a man driving, maybe mid-40s, thick beard, baseball cap. He didn't wave, didn't look over obviously, but I could feel him looking at me. The truck continued down the road toward the park exit. I stood there for a second after it disappeared, trying to decide if I was being paranoid. Then I grabbed the cigarette butts, wrapped them in a napkin, and drove straight to the ranger station near the entrance. I explained everything. The ranger, a woman probably in her 50s, listened without interrupting. When I showed her the butts and described the truck, she didn't look surprised. She asked what time it happened, asked if I saw the guy clearly. I told her about the unofficial parking spot. She nodded and said they've had issues with someone camping illegally and wandering into occupied sites at night. No violence reported, but boundary issues, she called it. That phrase stuck with me. She took my information and said they'd patrol the area more closely. I left after that. Didn't stick around to see what happened. I haven't camped alone since. It wasn't the footsteps by themselves. It was the waiting. The way he stood right outside the zipper and didn't say anything. The cigarettes smoked inches from where I was sleeping. Who does that? What was the plan? Was he just watching, seeing if I'd unzip the tent and step out without a light? I keep thinking about how small that tent is, how thin the fabric is, how easy it would have been for someone to slice it open. Nothing actually happened. I got out fine. But now, whenever I picture camping, I don't think about the trees or the quiet. I think about standing in the dark on the other side of someone's tent, listening to them breathe, deciding what to do next.